We start at the northernmost point of this area, just below the site of the old South Gate of the upper city of Lincoln. There are clues in the area's streets and buildings which can help us follow how it has developed over time. The area at the top of the North Escarpment was fortified by the Romans in 60 AD. The site of the former south gate of the fortress can still be made out. Look through the window of a shop on the eastern side of the road and you'll see masonry surviving from that Roman south gate. And on the opposite side of the road, remains of the western section of the gate survive in a tall pier of stone. As the roads climbed the hill to the upper city, they were forced to converge in order to pass through the gateway. This is why the area spreads down southwards from here in a widening fan. Looking south from this point, you have in front of you a steep downhill slope. This street, the aptly named Steep Hill, is the area's spine, which runs roughly north to south, becoming at its lower end the Strait. This is one of the most ancient parts of the city, which retains much of its medieval character, and together with Bailgate to the north and the High Street to the south, adds up to a linear cityscape of real national importance. These linked roads follow very closely the route of a road first built by the Romans, Ermine Street. The section which passes through Steep Hill probably only ever had a ceremonial function. It could never have suited wheeled traffic. First, walk downhill a few metres to the point where Wordsworth Street, Christ's Hospital Terrace and the top of Michaelgate all run into Steep Hill. This is one of several points along the length of Steep Hill where roads join it from east and west, and the whole townscape opens out to provide space and wider views to the south. The pattern of the streets here is an ancient one. Not just the Roman Ermine Street, but a number of curving medieval streets which, here and lower down the slope, give clues of the way that this part of Lincoln came to be inhabited, and also clues as to when. The oldest building here is the Norman House. It dates back to 1180, which makes it one of the oldest domestic buildings in Britain. As originally built, it had shops on the ground floor. The present ones are, of course, later, and the upper floors were lived in. The characteristic round-arched Romanesque windows contain much original material, and you can easily make out the traces of a former chimney stack built right over the arched doorway. Look at the surviving sections of the ornamental string course on the front. If you follow round to the south side, you'll see more there. Where Steep Hill meets Michaelgate, facing up the hill towards the former South Gate, the timber-framed Harlequin takes up the corner site. To the north, it has one jetty projecting out, but on the side facing Steep Hill, the falling ground gives it an extra floor, and with it, an extra jetty. It's a good example of the timbered houses which began to appear in Lincoln from the 15th century onwards. Walk on now, downhill. On the right, houses below the Harlequin were built as much as 300 years later. Numbers 17, 18 and 19 all date from around 1750, but they observe the wandering medieval building line. You get a good idea how these buildings on their narrow plots have changed over the centuries by looking at numbers 18 and 19. You can see clearly that the shop front now straddles two originally separate houses. Our downhill path takes us to another point where roads merge. On the left, Danesgate joins Steep Hill. It's a natural pausing point. Below us, the road starts its steepest descent, dividing into a section paved in granite setts, and a narrower pavement with an iron rail. On the corner of Steep Hill and Danesgate, the former St Michael's Parish Hall, built in 1926, makes a statement by being set back from the road. And facing it on the southern side of Danesgate, a house of much the same date observes the architectural style of its neighbours with rare fidelity. Further along Danesgate, a series of tall, rather grand red brick houses of the mid-19th century take advantage of their position to command the southward views. As you reach Well Lane, you're facing Danes cottages. They are of much the same date as the high-status ones we were just looking at, but they form a contrast with those exclusive houses. These streets have kept many of their original features, such as the array of stone sets in the road. Where Well Lane runs off to the right, there is a particularly striking example of this. At the bottom of Well Lane, we rejoin Steep Hill. As with other road junctions, the space opens out and we walk past two modern brick houses on the right, facing a coherent run of late 18th and early 19th century brick houses on the opposite side of the street. Although at first glance the houses are similar in character, you can tell from the brickwork that they were mostly built independently of each other. Some of them have delightfully individual detailing. The street opens out as we descend, until it meets Danes Terrace, which joins it from the east. During the Middle Ages, when Lincoln was flourishing thanks to the wool trade, this area was noted above all for markets. Over centuries, market stalls were laid out in rough alleyways along the line of what today are the permanent streets of the area. Gradually, these alleyways became regular streets, such as Danesgate and Michaelgate, as booths became permanent buildings. The process was largely complete, probably as early as the 12th century, as you can tell from the alignment of several very old houses in Steep Hill. One of them is here on the west side of the street, looking down Danes Terrace. The building, often known as the Jew's House, has stood here since 1170. You'll notice some of the same features as we saw in the Norman House, including a chimney stack above the main entrance. The stone building beside it, Jew's Court, is just as ancient, though its appearance has been much altered in the 16th and 17th centuries. Once the direction of the roads had been established, building and rebuilding continued on and off for a very long time. But as they do today, buildings continued to make up a complete solid line, with each redevelopment filling the plot of its predecessor. On the corner of Danes Terrace and the Strait, Newstadt Court is a residential development of 13 dwellings, dating from 1972. It seeks to accommodate itself to the townscape. In the use of brick, of pan-tiled roofs, and of oriel windows, that is, projecting windows above ground level. The area's southern boundary is the point where the Strait opens out onto the top of the High Street. This is the second of the Lincoln Heritage Trails, guided tours to the three oldest and most central parts of the city. Just as this heritage tour was a continuation of the Bailgate and Castle Hill tour, so the route carries into High Street. Why not revisit the Heritage Connect website and see how the story develops?